Welcome. You've just stepped into a quiet place, a space between sound and silence, between thought and breath. This is the empty boat, a channel not about escaping life, but about returning to it, slowly, gently, fully. Here, you won't be asked to believe in anything, only to sit, listen, and remember what your heart already knows. We offer you 25 Zen healing stories, not to entertain you, not to teach you, but to walk beside you, like a candle in the dark, like a hand on your back when the wind gets strong. Each story is a reflection, soft, spacious, sometimes strange, shaped from Buddhist wisdom and modern healing, meant to touch the places in you that words often miss. So, before we begin, take a breath. No rush. Let this moment open like a quiet door, because the truth is already inside you. And the boat, it's already waiting, empty, still, ready to carry you home. Soft bell fades into stillness. Story 1 begins. Story 1. The bamboo that wouldn't bend. The moonlight fell softly on the old monastery roof, tracing gentle silver lines across the tiles, like the silent brushstrokes of time. In the distance, the forest whispered with the voice of the night, wind, moving through the tall bamboo groves that surrounded the mountain temple. Each stalk swayed, bowed, and rose again, as though paying homage to something much older than words. I had arrived late, weary, carrying a quiet storm inside me, one made of control, fear, and the endless need to hold everything in place. Master Genjo was seated on the wooden porch, back straight, eyes half closed as if he were listening to the moon breathe. I sat down beside him, unsure of what to say. I had come with questions about control, about the terror of things falling apart, about how I kept losing sleep trying to fix what never seemed to stay still. I opened my mouth, but all that came was silence. He handed me a small bowl of tea, warm and fragrant, and said, "Let me tell you about a bamboo that refused to bend. There was once a single stalk of bamboo, tall and proud, that grew in a quiet valley far from here. Unlike the others around it, this bamboo did not sway when the wind passed through. It stood rigid, believing its strength lay in its stillness, in its unyielding posture. To bend is weakness, it would whisper to itself. I will be the one that stands unmoved, untouched. Seasons passed, and the bamboo grove danced with the breath of nature. Rain fell. Snow came and melted. Children played nearby and sang to the trees. But the rigid bamboo remained the same, unmoved, believing it was superior to those who bowed to the wind. Then one night, a storm came unlike any before. Thunder shook the valley. The wind howled like a beast unchained. Trees moaned and cracked. The bamboo grove bent and swayed, each stalk flowing with the wind, dancing low to the earth and rising again with grace. But the one bamboo, the one that had never learned to move, resisted. It clenched itself against the sky, fighting the wind with all its might. It snapped. At dawn, the birds returned. Light spilled across the valley. The wind had gone. The grove stood once more, swaying gently as before. Only one stalk lay broken on the ground, stiff, unmoving, no longer proud. Master Genjo looked at me, eyes filled with something softer than pity. The wind, he said, was never the enemy. The wind teaches movement, but the bamboo that sees surrender as defeat will always suffer. I held the bowl of tea tighter. My shoulders ached with years of holding tension. I thought of all the ways I had refused to yield, to deadlines, to change, to heartbreak, to imperfection. I had stood tall, yes, but often alone and often brittle. There's a saying, the master continued, the great way is not difficult for those who do not cling. But when we cling to control, to expectations, to who we think we must be, we fight the wind itself. In the silence that followed, something in me began to tremble, not from fear, but from the unfamiliar sensation of letting go, of not needing to understand everything, of trusting the moment to carry me instead of resisting it. Later that evening, I walked among the real bamboo outside the temple. The moonlight danced through their hollow bodies, and I could hear them breathing in unison. There was no pride in them, only presence. They moved not because they were weak, but because they knew how to remain rooted while still allowing change. That was the lesson I had come for, not to be stronger, but to be softer, not to resist the storm, but to become its student. In modern life, we are taught that control is power, that we must plan, direct, and shape our lives into something predictable and safe. But true control is an illusion. Life does not follow our blueprints. People leave, jobs vanish, health falters. Even our own minds surprise us with sudden grief, sudden joy, or unexplained emptiness. Psychologists speak of control as a survival instinct, anxiety's favorite tool. We tighten our grip when we feel unsafe. But in doing so, we lose our ability to respond with grace. We become like the rigid bamboo, unable to yield, unable to adapt. And we break, silently and painfully, often alone. What if we allowed ourselves to bend? Not to surrender to every whim of life, but to surrender to the reality that we cannot shape the storm. We can only learn to dance with it. That night, as I lay in my simple room with only the sound of the wind and the memory of the master's voice, I asked myself, where in my life am I refusing to bend? Where am I mistaking control for strength? What might happen if I let go, just a little, and trusted the wind to teach me? The answer didn't come in words, but in breath. A long, slow breath that seemed to reach into the center of my chest and say, "You are already the bamboo. You have simply forgotten how to sway." Before you sleep tonight, sit for a moment. Close your eyes. Feel where in your body you are holding too tightly. Perhaps in the jaw, the shoulders, the stomach. Ask gently, without judgment, what am I afraid will happen if I let go? Let the silence answer you. You may find that beneath your tension is not weakness, but softness, not collapse, but rootedness. You may find, like the bamboo, that your truest strength is your ability to move and rise again. The moon is still high, the wind still sings, and somewhere, deep inside you, something long rigid may begin, at last, to sway. You only lose what you cling to. The Buddha. Story 2. The Empty Teacup. Rain whispered softly on the temple roof, each drop like a syllable spoken in a forgotten language. In the meditation hall, the air was thick with sandalwood and stillness. I had come again with my questions, this time not about control but about understanding. I wanted clarity. I wanted answers. I wanted the teachings of the Dharma to fit perfectly into the boxes I had already built in my mind. But Master Genjo met my urgency with silence, as he always did, until the moment chose to speak for him. "Come," he said one morning, motioning toward the tea room. "Bring your mind with you." but be prepared to empty it. He poured tea slowly into 2 ceramic cups. The sound of the liquid was like a stream in miniature, flowing through time. When my cup was nearly full, I expected him to stop, but he did not. He kept pouring. The tea overflowed. It ran over the rim, down the side of the cup, onto the wooden table and into my lap. "Master," I cried, startled. "It's full. It's overflowing," he set the kettle down. "Exactly," he said. I stared at him in confused silence. He looked at me gently, not to mock, but to reveal. "You have come with your cup full," he said. "Full of ideas, opinions, judgments, interpretations. You want to pour the Dharma into it, but it has no space left. What you need is not more tea. What you need is an empty cup." In that moment I understood, but only slightly. The lesson, like the tea, had spilled out and made a mess of what I thought I knew. I was a seeker, yes, but I was also a collector of philosophies, techniques, labels, theories. I had layered ideas upon ideas, hoping they would keep me safe from uncertainty. But they had become walls, and the Dharma, like water, cannot fill a vessel already closed off. In the days that followed, I began to notice how often I reacted with knowing instead of listening. A friend would speak of pain, and I would reply with advice. I heard people not to understand them, but to reinforce my own conclusions. Every conversation was filtered through what I already believed to be true. But truth in Zen is not an accumulation. It is not a tower of thoughts built upward. It is a subtraction, a distillation, like clouds parting to reveal a moon that has always been there. Master Genjo once said, "The path is not something you walk to gain. It is what remains when you stop trying to walk." I began practicing differently, not by adding more teachings, but by sitting quietly and watching my thoughts rise like steam, then fade. When someone spoke, I practiced receiving their words like falling rain, without needing to gather them into conclusions. Modern psychology calls this non-reactive awareness. In cognitive terms, the brain seeks to pattern match, to interpret, based on past information. But in doing so, it filters the present through the lens of the past. Healing often begins not when we understand more, but when we release the compulsion to interpret. We become aware of how we are aware. A therapist might call this metacognition. A Zen master might call it original mind. One day, I found myself in a heated argument with someone close to me. Their words hit a place in me that had been sore for years. I wanted to lash back, defend myself, explain, correct. But I remembered the cup. I asked inwardly, what am I full of right now? I was full of fear, of being misunderstood, full of pride, needing to be right, full of old wounds, demanding recognition. I didn't need to pour more into that moment. I needed to set the cup down and listen, not to the words alone, but to the silence underneath them. When I did, something remarkable happened. The conflict didn't dissolve instantly, but it softened. The space between us became less rigid, and inside me, something emptied. And in that emptiness, peace entered. Master Genjo once told me, emptiness is not the absence of meaning, it is the absence of clinging. The world today encourages us to fill every moment. Every silence must be covered by music or scrolling. Every thought must be tweeted. Every emotion labeled, processed, optimized. But what if healing comes not from adding more, but from subtracting what is no longer needed? In one of the earliest discourses, the Buddha spoke of a monk who asked, "What must I do to be liberated?" And the Buddha replied, "Drop what is not yours." We carry so much that is not ours. Expectations, traumas we did not cause. identities, we constructed to survive. We drink from cups that are already full of someone else's ideas of success, love, purpose. No wonder peace cannot enter. There is no room. So we begin to empty, not all at once, but drop by drop. Each moment of silence, each pause before we speak, each act of not knowing, that is the path. Tonight, before you sleep, sit with your breath. Gently ask, what am I holding on to today? What do I know too much of? What can I allow to be unknown? Then, imagine your thoughts like water in a cup. Slowly, slowly, let it pour out. Not because water is bad, but because the cup wants to be ready for something fresh, something real, something alive. The rain outside the temple has stopped. The world is quiet. The cup is empty now. You may find that the silence it contains is enough. In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few. Shunryu Suzuki. Story 3. The Mirror Pond. The morning mist hovered above the surface of the temple pond, so still that the trees on the bank looked like they had fallen asleep in their own reflections. Not a ripple broke the water, and even the koi fish swam, as though respecting the silence. I walked there often at dawn, needing something I couldn't yet name. Peace, perhaps, or understanding, or just a reason to feel less lost in my own mind. That morning, I found Master Genjo seated on the wooden dock by the pond. His robes blended into the stones and shadows as if he had always belonged there. He didn't look at me, but spoke softly, like he was speaking to the wind. "Look into the water," he said. "What do you see?" I knelt beside him. The surface reflected everything: the trees above, the morning sky, the grey clouds. But it also reflected me, my tired eyes, the tension in my jaw, the small worry lines I hadn't noticed forming. My face looked like a stranger I was still learning to greet. "I see myself," I said. He nodded. "Is the water showing you something, or are you simply seeing what is already there?" I didn't answer. He picked up a small stone and gently tossed it into the pond. The ripples spread outward, distorting the reflection. My face stretched and twisted into something unrecognizable. And yet the water, after a few seconds, returned to stillness. "Watch what happens," he said. "Watch carefully." The ripples faded. The water stilled. And once again, the reflection was clear. "That," he said, "is your mind, and your pain, and your healing." The simplicity of it unsettled me. My mind, too, often felt like a pond shaken by stones, some thrown by the world, some by my own hand. Anger, regret, worry, shame. Each one a pebble that broke the surface. I would react, trying to fix the ripples, trying to force the water to be still again. But in doing so, I only made it worse. "You do not still the pond by touching it," Master Genjo said, reading my thoughts. "You wait, you breathe, you let the disturbance settle by itself." I wanted that stillness. I had wanted it for years, but I had always tried to reach it by effort, by reading more, doing more, fixing more, meditating with a kind of aggression that defeated its own purpose. But this was different. This was about allowing. We sat in silence, and I began to notice something else. The pond reflected not just me, but the world. And when it rippled, it distorted not just my face, but the whole image. When I was disturbed, the world looked wrong too. People's words felt like attacks. Situations felt unfair. I couldn't see clearly, not because the world had changed, but because my inner water was stirred. Modern psychology has a term for this: cognitive distortion. When our minds are unsettled by strong emotion, we project that disturbance outward. We interpret neutral situations as hostile, misunderstand others' intentions, expect the worst. Like ripples on a pond, our emotions bend the truth. But Zen teaches us something deeper. The mind is not the problem. It's the clinging to the disturbance, the need to react, the refusal to wait that causes suffering. We don't have to chase stillness. We return to it by not resisting the motion. There was a time in my life when I felt shattered. A relationship ended, not with drama, but with quiet disappointment. I had built so much of my identity around it, and when it dissolved, I felt like I had too. The days that followed were filled with desperate attempts to understand, to analyze, to control what I couldn't accept. I remember staring at myself in the mirror one morning and feeling like I didn't recognize the person looking back. My face was the same, but I was no longer sure who was behind it. The mind had become a storm, and yet, slowly, without effort, the storm passed. Not because I figured everything out, but because I stopped needing to. Like the pond, left undisturbed, my heart remembered how to reflect again. Not just myself, but life. Master Genjo once said, "A mirror never argues with the face it shows. It only waits for the light to return." That light returns when we stop fighting what we see, when we allow the moment to be exactly as it is, not perfect, not painless, but real. There's a story from early Buddhism about a monk who asked the Buddha, "What is the nature of the awakened mind?" And the Buddha replied, "Like a calm, clear lake, reflecting all things but clinging to none." That image stayed with me, and when I feel overwhelmed now, I close my eyes and breathe. I do not try to silence my thoughts. I watch them ripple and settle, ripple and settle, again and again, and slowly clarity returns. You may be going through something right now, a storm of your own. It may feel like the world itself has shifted, but perhaps it is only the surface of the water that has been touched. Beneath it, the depths are still whole, still undisturbed, still waiting for you. Tonight, before you sleep, sit with that image. Close your eyes. Inhale slowly. Picture your mind as a pond. Allow each thought, each feeling to rise like a ripple. Watch it. Welcome it. Then let it go. Do not try to fix it. Simply notice when the water stills on its own. There, in that moment, you may see your own reflection again. Not the person you were, not the person others told you to be, but the presence that has been watching all along. And that presence does not need to change anything. It only needs to see. When the mind is calm, the mirror of the soul reflects the truth of all things. Zen proverb. Story 4. The monk who planted fire. In the far edge of the monastery garden, where the stones gave way to wild grass and the mountain breeze grew freer, there was a small plot of land, charred, blackened, seemingly abandoned. No flowers bloomed there. No vegetables grew. Only ash remained. I had passed it many times without asking, assuming it was unused, forgotten, or simply infertile. But one afternoon, Master Genjo led me there with a spade in one hand and a small satchel of seeds in the other. "Today," he said with a soft smile, "we plant fire." I frowned, unsure if I had heard him correctly. He knelt by the edge of the burned earth and began to dig gently. The ash crumbled easily under his fingers. It looked lifeless, but there was something soft and rich beneath it. I followed his lead, my hands digging into the cool soil. "Years ago," he said, "this land was filled with weeds so thick they choked everything else. Nothing grew except what was wild and wild with anger. We tried pulling them, watering around them, but nothing worked. So we burned it." He said the word not with pride, but with a strange, solemn reverence. "We do not often talk about destruction as part of healing," he continued, "but sometimes fire is the medicine." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The idea that something must be allowed to burn, not out of hatred, not out of rage, but out of the necessity to begin again. I had always feared endings. I saw them as failures. I held on to friendships long past their meaning, habits long past their usefulness, and beliefs that no longer fit the shape of my soul. Letting go had always felt like death, but here was this monk, kneeling in the ashes of his own decision to burn what no longer served, and he called it planting. Modern psychology speaks of a similar paradox. We fear loss, yet clinging causes suffering. We are taught that healing is linear, that it always feels good, that we grow upward like trees. But sometimes, healing looks like collapse. Like releasing everything we thought defined us, like losing our way so completely that a new way must appear. Therapists call it the dark night of the soul, a time of necessary unmaking. Neuroscience might call it neural pruning, the process by which the brain clears out unused connections to make space for new learning. Even our biology understands. Fire clears the forest floor so new life can breathe. Still, the pain of that fire is real. There was a time in my life when I stood at the edge of such fire. I had built my life carefully, achievement by achievement, role by role. I had become someone I thought I should be, but I was also exhausted, bitter, disconnected from myself. I couldn't rest. I couldn't feel joy. Everything I did was touched by the brittle edge of trying to prove my worth. Then, one day, it all collapsed. A failed project, a broken relationship, a crack in the foundation I thought was solid. I burned, not literally, but inside something crumbled. I tried to resist it. I tried to patch the structure, but nothing held. And eventually, I did what I never thought I could. I stopped trying. I let it burn. In the quiet that followed, I found something unexpected. Space. Freedom. Like the charred garden, there was ash, but also richness beneath the surface. Back in the monastery garden, days passed. The seeds we planted began to sprout, tiny green shoots rising from black soil. They looked too fragile to live, yet they did. Each day I visited them, watched them, learned from them. Healing, I realized, doesn't begin in perfection. It begins in permission. Permission to fail. Permission to feel. Permission to begin again, without shame. One evening, I asked Master Genjo if he had ever regretted burning the weeds. He paused, eyes on the growing shoots. "No," he said, "but I had to grieve what I burned. Even weeds have roots." That struck me deeply. We often imagine that what we let go of should stay gone without sorrow. But even in transformation, grief has its place. We mourn not just what was harmful, but what was familiar, what we gave our time to, what we once called home. But grief too is a kind of fire, a sacred one. It clears what clings too tightly to the past. In one sutra, the Buddha says, "Just as a snake sheds its skin, so must we shed our past again and again." He does not say this without compassion. He knew the pain of shedding, but he also knew what lives underneath the old skin. Tonight, if you are standing before a fire, if something in your life is collapsing or already gone, know this: you are not broken. You are becoming ready. Ash is not an end, it is a beginning. Before you sleep, close your eyes and breathe deeply. Picture a part of your life that no longer serves your becoming, something you've outgrown, something that aches to be released. Then imagine placing it into a small fire, not to punish, but to free. Watch it burn. Let it go, and in its place, imagine rich soil, soft, dark, open. Now, plant something there, a word, an intention, a quiet hope. Watch it grow, slowly. It will not be fast or perfect, but it will be yours. And one day, like the monk, you too may kneel in the ashes and call it planting. The phoenix must burn to emerge. Buddhist teaching. Story 5. The wind that had no name. It was early autumn when the leaves began to fall like prayers whispered too softly to be heard. The maple trees near the stone path had begun to blush red and gold, and the air carried a quiet chill that hinted at impermanence. In the temple courtyard, I sat watching a single leaf spin through the wind, rising and falling, dancing without purpose. It landed near my feet, and I looked up to see Master Genjo brushing dust from an old wooden bench with the sleeve of his robe. "Do you know where the wind begins?" he asked, not looking at me. I shook my head. He smiled. "Neither does the wind." He sat beside me, his movements slow, effortless. The world around us had grown soft with silence. A few birds chirped from a distance, and somewhere beyond the trees, a bell rang, long and low, folding into the valley like a gentle exhale. "There was once a young monk," Genjo began, "who feared change more than anything. Every shift in the season, every new task, every word from others he could not predict filled him with anxiety. He needed to name things, to label them, to understand everything before it touched him. He feared what he could not hold." I recognized myself in that monk. Maybe most of us do. "One day," the master continued, "a great wind swept through the mountains. Trees bent, dust swirled. The monk asked everyone what kind of wind it was. Is it a storm wind? Is it a seasonal wind? Is it dangerous?" he asked. But no one could give him a name. Frustrated, he climbed to the highest peak and shouted into the sky, "Tell me your name." The wind, in response, only passed through him, softly, then fiercely, then softly again. He returned to the temple in tears. "I cannot understand what I cannot name," he told his teacher, and the teacher replied, "Then let it touch you without understanding." Genjo paused and looked at the same leaf I had seen earlier, now drifting away on a new breeze. "That was the first moment the monk ever truly felt the wind," he said, "when he stopped trying to control its meaning." I sat in silence. The story settled in me like a pebble dropped into a deep well. There is a deep human need to understand, to name emotions, to define experiences. It gives us a sense of safety, of ground beneath our feet. But some experiences, like the wind, are unnameable. They come without explanation. A sudden grief that cannot be traced. A wave of peace for no reason. A shift in direction when logic would say, stay the course. And often, our suffering comes not from the experience itself, but from our insistence on knowing it completely before we let it pass. Psychology calls this intolerance of uncertainty. It's linked with anxiety, obsessive thoughts, even depression. We want to know what comes next, what others think, what the right decision is. But life does not live inside our categories, and neither does healing. In therapy, we're often guided to explore our emotions, to name anger, sadness, fear. This is valuable, but sometimes words fall short, and that's when the wisdom of silence begins. There are times when what we feel cannot be put into language, a loss that has no shape, a longing that cannot be satisfied, a transformation that does not fit a narrative. And in those moments, perhaps the most sacred thing we can do is listen, not with the mind, but with presence. Master Genjo often said, "Not everything that visits your heart is here to be solved. Some things come only to be felt." I remembered a time in my life when I was overcome with a sense of emptiness. Everything in my external world was fine, work, relationships, even health. But there was a hollow space inside me, like a room where someone once lived but had long since moved out. I tried to name it. Depression, spiritual crisis, boredom, but no word fit. The more I tried to label it, the further away it seemed to move. Eventually, I stopped trying. I sat with it like one might sit with a child who doesn't yet know how to speak. I breathed. I let it stay. And slowly, it began to shift. Not into an answer, but into a peace that needed no answer. The wind, as it turned out, had no name. In Buddhist teachings, there is a deep reverence for what is called suchness, the reality of things as they are, beyond concept, beyond thought. The lotus is not beautiful because we name it beautiful. It simply is. The mountain does not know it is a mountain. It just stands. And you, in your most raw and honest state, are not your roles, not your labels, not even your feelings. You are presence itself, the one who experiences all things, yet remains untouched at the core. The wind that passes through you does not need to be defined. It only needs to be felt. Tonight, before you sleep, close your eyes and remember a moment that left you speechless, good or painful. A moment too large or too delicate to be understood. Breathe into it. Do not try to give it a name. Just let it be. And let yourself be, too, like the wind, uncontained, nameless, free. The great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. The third patriarch of Zen. Story 6. The cup that refused to break. There was a cup in the monastery, simple, unglazed clay, the color of earth after rain. It sat alone on a shelf in the kitchen, unused, forgotten, yet always there. I had walked past it many times without noticing it until one evening, when Master Genjo held it in his palm and looked at it as one might look at a sleeping bird. He turned to me and said, "This cup has refused to break." I raised an eyebrow. "Should it?" He smiled gently, then placed the cup on the table and invited me to sit. Outside, the sky was fading into indigo. Candlelight flickered against the old wood. The night was quiet in the way that asks you to listen deeply, not just to sound, but to your own breath. There was a potter, he began, who was known throughout the region for her exquisite teacups. She would shape them with bare hands, fire them with care, and paint each one with stories in glaze, rivers, birds, flowers caught mid-bloom. But one cup she made was different. It was strong, almost too strong. No matter how much it was dropped, knocked, or even chipped, it never broke. It clung to its wholeness like a warrior refusing to bleed. I listened, unsure where the tale was going. The potter admired it at first, but over time she began to dislike it. Not because it was ugly, it was quite beautiful, but because it never allowed itself to be transformed. Every other cup, once broken, was mended with gold, lacquer becoming more precious for its scars. This one stayed the same, always perfect, always closed. I looked down at the cup on the table. She kept it, Genjo continued, but never used it, because she said, "This cup does not trust the hands of time." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, with memory, with emotion, with the subtle discomfort of recognition. I had always tried not to break. I wore my strength like armor, thinking if I stayed whole, untouched, unshaken, I would be safe. I told myself it was resilience, but perhaps it was refusal. We are taught to be strong, to endure, to hold ourselves together. But what if true healing lies not in staying intact, but in allowing the breaks? What if the cracks are not the problem, but the place where light enters? Modern psychology speaks of post-traumatic growth. The idea that after deep suffering, loss, illness, grief, some individuals don't just return to baseline, but expand. They become more compassionate, more present, more aligned with what matters, not in spite of their pain, but because of it. There's an ancient Japanese practice called kintsugi, where broken pottery is mended with gold. The idea is not to hide the cracks, but to illuminate them. The history of the break becomes the art. The flaw becomes the design. Master Genjo once told me, "What does not break, does not open." I remembered a time in my own life when I had been the unbreakable cup. After a sudden loss, I buried myself in routine. I smiled, I worked, I gave advice to others. I told myself I was fine, but inside there was a silence that kept growing. I did not cry. I did not scream. I only endured. One day, sitting alone, I dropped a cup from the kitchen shelf. It shattered instantly. Something in me shattered too. I wept, not for the cup, but because I had finally broken, on the inside, where it had been building for months. And, after that moment, I changed. Not quickly, not completely, but something softened. I let others see my pain. I allowed comfort. I forgave myself for not being okay. I began to mend, not with gold, but with truth. In Buddhist teachings, the lotus is a sacred symbol. It grows in mud, not in clear water. Its beauty is not born of purity, but of transformation. The mud is not a mistake. It is the beginning. Sometimes we are that lotus. Other times we are the cup. And still other times we are both, broken and beautiful. Tonight, if there is something in you that feels fractured, an old shame, a fresh sorrow, a quiet loneliness, do not rush to patch it. Do not pretend it never cracked. Instead, sit with it. Let it speak. Ask, "What is this trying to show me?" And then listen, not with your mind, but with your heart. The kind of listening that does not require fixing, the kind that believes you can be whole even while healing. Before you sleep, close your eyes. Place your hand gently over your chest. Breathe. Whisper to yourself, "I do not need to be unbroken to be whole." Say it again. Say it slowly. Say it like you are planting a seed in your own soul. And in time, when the light returns, it will find its way through your cracks. Because even cups are made to be held, and you too are still worth holding. To be broken is no reason to see yourself as broken. Zen proverb. Story 7. The Gate That Opens Inward. There was a gate at the far end of the monastery, old and unused, nestled in ivy and half covered in time. Unlike the great gates at the front entrance, polished, welcoming, often open, this one was quiet, unnoticed, almost forgotten. It leaned slightly to one side, its wooden slats worn smooth by rain and years of waiting. I first saw it during walking meditation, drawn not by intention, but by something quieter than curiosity, an ache that felt like recognition. I stood before it, unsure if it even led anywhere anymore. I placed my hand on its cool wood, and to my surprise, it did not open outward, but inward. The hinges creaked like old bones waking from sleep. Beyond it was not a path, but a small, walled garden, a place both hidden and peaceful. Stones arranged in silent geometry, moss growing with patient grace, and a single plum tree with petals like fallen snow. Later, I asked Master Genjo why no one spoke of the inward gate. He smiled with a look that suggested the answer would not come in words. Then, after a long pause, he said, "Because most people knock outward, looking for the world to open." I sat with his answer for days. It circled inside me like a koan that refused resolution. The gate had become a symbol, one I began to see everywhere, in moments of anger, when I wanted the world to change first, in moments of fear, when I waited for life to give permission before I trusted, in all the times I believed peace lay somewhere out there, beyond my reach, just one door away if only. The world would open up, but what if the real gate always opens inward? One morning, as fog lingered in the valley, and the monastery bells had not yet rung, Master Genjo spoke of an old story. There was once a man who travelled far and wide looking for the door to enlightenment. He climbed mountains, crossed rivers, sat with sages, fasted for weeks. But every door he found was locked. Some told him he was not ready. Others said he lacked the right prayers or the right karma. Finally, in despair, he sat beneath a tree and wept. An old woman passing by asked why he cried. He told her of his journey, his failure, his exhaustion. She looked at him with kind eyes and said, "Have you tried the door behind your own ribs?" The man, confused, placed a hand over his chest, and in that stillness, something opened, not with noise, not with light, but with recognition. Master Genjo paused. The longest journey is often the shortest path, because it turns. I began to understand. We spend so much of our lives facing outward, seeking, striving, comparing, demanding. We wait for love to arrive, for success to validate us, for the world to tell us we are finally enough. But the gate of true transformation is not out there. It is in here, within the quiet sanctuary we often avoid because it holds not answers, but mirrors. Modern psychology speaks of this too. Internal locus of control, the belief that we can shape our experience from within, is one of the strongest predictors of resilience, happiness, and peace. When we shift our gaze inward, not with blame, but with awareness, we begin to reclaim our power. Yet this turning is not easy. It feels counterintuitive, especially when we hurt. The instinct is to reach outward, to change others, to fix circumstances, to escape. But healing invites us to turn toward the ache, not away. To open the gate behind our own ribs and sit gently with what we find. I remember a time in my life when I felt abandoned. A friendship had ended without closure, leaving behind a silence. I filled with stories of rejection, not enoughness, betrayal. I replayed conversations, wrote unsent letters, even tried to move on too quickly. but none of it eased the ache. One night, exhausted by the noise in my head, I sat on the floor in the dark and asked aloud, "What is this pain trying to show me?" The silence that followed was not empty. It was dense with truth. I realized I had been waiting, hoping for the other person to open the door again, to return, to explain. But the closure I craved was not theirs to give. It lived behind my own ribs. I had to grieve. I had to forgive. I had to turn the handle myself. And when I did, something shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. The ache didn't vanish, but it softened. I stopped waiting for the world to open, and instead began to walk through my own heart. In the Lotus Sutra, the Buddha speaks of a hidden treasure buried in the home of a poor man. He searches his whole life, not knowing he already sits atop it. This is the parable of the inward gate. What we seek is often already here, waiting behind the very suffering that seems to keep it hidden. So the next time you feel stuck, ask, am I pushing the wrong way? Am I waiting for life to open when the gate moves inward? Before you sleep tonight, sit with your back straight and eyes closed. Place your hands gently over your heart. Inhale slowly. On the exhale, imagine a door swinging open, quietly, gently, not into the world, but into yourself. Step inside. What do you find? Not perfect peace, perhaps, but honesty, softness, the child you once were, the wounds you've carried, the strength you didn't know you still had. This is your garden. This is the hidden place. This is the gate that opens not to the world, but to your true self. And you, dear listener, are the only one who can walk through it. Peace comes not when the world is quiet, but when the heart is. Zen saying, Story 8. The silence between the notes. It was during one of the rare evenings when a traveling musician visited the monastery. He was a quiet man with silver-threaded hair, carrying a simple wooden flute. He said little. No dramatic introduction, no ceremony. Just a deep bow, and then he raised the flute to his lips and began to play beneath the moonlit veranda where the lanterns flickered like fireflies in meditation. The melody was soft, unhurried, almost incomplete. Notes appeared and disappeared like ripples in a still pond. But it wasn't the music itself that caught me. It was what lay between the notes, the silences, the pauses, the spaces where nothing happened, and yet something stirred deeply in the chest. I felt my breath slow. My mind quieted, not because of the music, but because of the hush that surrounded it. Later that night, as we sipped tea in silence, Master Genjo looked up from his bowl and said, "Music without silence is only noise." His words struck something unspoken within me. All my life I had filled space, filled time, filled silence with explanations, distractions, achievements. I had been taught that to be empty was to be useless, that to pause was to fall behind. But here, in this quiet monastery, the absence of sound had more presence than all the noise I had chased in the world beyond. There was a composer, Genjo said, who spent years trying to write the perfect piece. He filled every measure with notes, each one carefully calculated. When he played it, the music was impressive, but exhausting. No one returned to hear it again. One day, he visited an old Zen master and asked for guidance. The master listened, then said nothing for a long time. Just sat there, drinking tea. Finally, the composer asked, "Do you not like the music?" The master said, "I cannot breathe in it. There is no room for the listener to enter." I thought of my life as that composition, packed tight with plans, obligations, thoughts, expectations. No rest, no breath, no space for the soul to stretch out and simply be. In modern psychology, there's a growing recognition of what is called cognitive load. The idea that the mind, like a system, can only process so much information at once. When overwhelmed, it loses clarity, memory, even emotional regulation. But beyond the science, there is something deeply human in the way we respond to silence. Not as absence, but as sanctuary. The silence between thoughts is not nothing. It is the ground of everything. Zen teachings often describe this space as ma, a Japanese term for the gap or pause that allows meaning to emerge. In calligraphy, it's the white space that gives the ink its voice. In music, it's the rest that allows the note to breathe. In life, it's the stillness that allows the heart to remember itself. But we are afraid of silence, aren't we? We fill it with words, noise, distractions. Because silence holds a mirror, and in that mirror, we must face what we often run from: our sadness, our longing, our confusion, our truth. I remember a time when I feared being alone. I filled every waking moment with activity, work, messages, news, podcasts, background noise. Silence felt like failure, like being forgotten. But slowly, through practice, I began to sit with it. Just a few minutes each day. No phone, no plan. Just breath and presence. At first, it was unbearable. The mind rebelled. But then, something shifted. The silence became warm, soft, alive, like an old friend who says nothing, but stays anyway. And in that quiet, I heard something for the first time in years: myself. One evening, I sat with Master Genjo beneath the stars. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Then, without turning, he said, "The universe is not in the sound. It is in the silence that holds it." I looked up. The stars didn't speak. The wind didn't ask for attention. And yet, nothing felt missing. So much of suffering, I've come to see, is not caused by pain itself, but by the constant noise we build around it, our commentary, our resistance, our demands. But when we allow space, even around suffering, it softens, it breathes, it tells its story, then moves on. Tonight, before you sleep, turn off everything, all of it. Sit in the darkness, not to think, not to solve, just to listen. Listen to what exists between your thoughts, between your breaths. Let it open like a door, not into another place, but into a deeper now. And if emotions arise, welcome them. Do not fill the space. Just let them echo. Let them dance. Let them pass. There is music in your silence. There is healing in your stillness. You are not empty. You are the space that holds everything. It is the silence between the notes that makes the music. Zen proverb. Story 9. The river that forgot the ocean. The river behind the monastery was quiet that time of year. Its current, once loud and boisterous in the spring, had softened into a slow drift, like breath between sentences. Some mornings I would sit by its banks, tracing fallen leaves with my eyes as they floated along, never resisting, never asking where they would end up. But on this particular morning, the river reminded me of something else. Myself. I had been feeling restless, like I was moving constantly, but arriving nowhere. Even the practices, meditation, silence, walking, felt thin, like distant echoes of something I had once felt deeply but could no longer reach. I told Master Genjo, and he listened the way only the old trees listen, without interruption, without rush. Then he said, "A river, when it forgets it comes from the ocean, begins to fear the stones." At first, I didn't understand, but he didn't explain. He simply stood, and we walked together down to where the water bent behind the rocks. The sun was still low, and mist clung to the surface like a memory reluctant to leave. "There once was a stream," he said, "born from the melting snow of a nameless mountain. It danced down cliffs, carved valleys, gave life to forests and rice fields. But the farther it traveled, the more it forgot where it began. The world became louder, the banks grew narrow, and the stream, now a river, began to fear the path ahead, especially the places where the rocks grew sharp and the flow became uncertain." I nodded, listening. "One day," he continued, "the river reached a canyon where the current twisted wildly. It tried to slow itself, to resist the movement, to turn back. But the more it fought, the more it churned. Exhausted, it cried out to the wind, 'Why must I be pushed forward into what I do not know?' And the wind whispered, 'Because you are returning.'" I looked out at the water. Even here, near the monastery, the river had no choice but to continue. It could not stop, and it did not need to. "You are not lost," Genjo said gently. "You are simply remembering." His words sat in my chest like a small warm stone. I had thought my restlessness was a sign of disconnection, but perhaps it was the stirring of return, not to a place, but to a knowing I had long forgotten. In many spiritual traditions, this longing we feel, the ache beneath the ache, is not seen as a flaw but as a compass, a pull towards something greater than success or identity. In Buddhism, it's called dukkha, the unsatisfactoriness of things, not to punish us, but to remind us we are rivers. We come from the ocean, and we are always, somehow, flowing back. Modern psychology speaks of the default mode network, the part of the brain active when we're not engaged in tasks, when we're daydreaming or remembering. It is also the part most active in states of longing, reflection, and sense of self, and sometimes it misleads us, trapping us in ruminations. But when we sit quietly, when we allow ourselves to listen beneath the mental chatter, we touch something older than thought, a current deeper than memory. That current is what calls us home. There was a period in my life when I lost all sense of direction. On the surface, everything was fine. I was doing meaningful work. I had people around me. But inside, something felt adrift, like I was floating through days with no anchor. I tried to fix it. New goals, new routines, more effort, but nothing filled the hollow space I couldn't name. Eventually, I stopped. Not out of wisdom, but out of exhaustion. I sat by a river, much like this one, and simply watched. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't think. I felt. I didn't try to return anywhere. I let myself be where I was. And slowly, something shifted. A quiet knowing bubbled up, not with words, but with warmth. I didn't need to find the ocean. I was already in it. I had only forgotten. The river does not need to remember every turn. It only needs to keep flowing. It cannot undo the path, and it does not have to fear the stones. The water is shaped by the rocks, yes, but it is not broken by them, and neither are you. If you are tired, uncertain, or aching for something you cannot name, Let this be a gentle reminder. Your soul remembers where it came from, even when your mind forgets. You are not behind. You are not late. You are not wrong. You are becoming clear again. Tonight, before you sleep, imagine a river inside your chest. Close your eyes. Feel its movement. Not rushing, not stagnant, but steady. Ask yourself, gently, what have I been resisting, that is, simply asking me to return? Then breathe. Let the current take you. Do not demand a destination. Do not fear the stones. You are not meant to be still. You are meant to flow. And always, always, you are returning to something vast, something ancient, something that has never left you. You do not need to know where you are going. The path is the river. The river is the path. Zen Reflection. Story 10. The lantern that burned without flame. It was during the darkest part of winter, when the days felt short and the nights stretched long across the valley, wrapping the monastery in a kind of hush that even the wind respected. Snow had come and gone, leaving the stone steps slick with memory. One evening, as I walked the inner corridor, I noticed a lantern flickering outside the old zazen hall. But what caught my attention was not the flame. It had none. It glowed, faint and warm, from within, though no fire danced behind the glass. I brought this to Master Genjo, puzzled. He studied it with the same calm he gave to stars or suffering. This one, he said, doesn't burn with flame. It remembers light. I laughed lightly, unsure if it was a metaphor or some old Zen trick, but his eyes didn't waver. He placed the lantern between us and sat on the cold wooden floor, inviting me to join him. There was once a village that had forgotten the sun, he began. Generations had passed in shadow. They lived, worked, loved beneath a sky that never cleared. The elders told stories of light, but no one alive had ever truly seen it. One day, a child was born with a strange gift. She glowed, not brightly, not blindingly, just a soft, steady warmth, like twilight resting on water. She became a mystery. Some feared her, others worshipped her, but she said only this: I carry the memory of what is real. I listened, not to the story alone, but to the silence it opened within me. There was something familiar about the girl in the tale, something that stirred in the center of my chest. Genjo continued. The villagers asked her to light the world, to bring back what had been lost, but she only smiled and said, I cannot bring it back, but I can remind you where it lives. And one by one, as they sat beside her, something in them began to warm, not from her, but from within themselves. The light had never left. It had only been forgotten. I thought of the lantern again, glowing without flame, not because something burned, but because something remembered. So much of life, I realized, is about remembering, not with the mind, but with the soul, not facts or stories, but presence. A knowing beyond knowledge, a light beyond fire. There was a time not long ago when I felt I had lost all sense of inner light. The world outside was difficult, personal loss, collective grief, exhaustion from trying to hold too much for too long. I didn't feel dark, exactly, but dim, as though something essential had gone quiet. I tried all the usual ways to rekindle it. More meditation, more reading, more reaching. But the more I searched, the more distant it felt. I feared the flame had gone out. Then one night, I stopped trying. I turned off all the lights in my room, sat in the dark, and breathed. not with effort, but with surrender. And in that stillness, something subtle began to glow, not in my eyes, not even in my mind, but somewhere deeper, a warmth, a presence, a simple awareness. I am here. I am still here. Modern therapy often talks about the inner child, the part of us that carries original wonder, vulnerability, and presence. But there's another part, perhaps older, less studied, the inner witness. The part of us that has seen everything, survived everything, and still quietly pulses with life. It may not shine brightly, but it glows. And when all else falls away, it remains. This inner witness is the lantern, and it needs no flame. It is not powered by certainty, or success, or even clarity. It burns with remembering that you are more than what you do, that your worth is not measured by your light's visibility, but by its presence, soft, steady, enduring. The Buddha once said, "Be a lamp unto yourself." He did not say, "Be bright." He did not say, "Burn always." He said, "Be the source, be the quiet holder of truth, be the one who remembers." And perhaps that is all we are ever really doing on this path, not becoming something new, but uncovering what has always been there, beneath the layers, beneath the forgetting. Tonight, if you feel tired or dim, do not search for a flame outside you. Sit, close your eyes, let the darkness arrive, and then turn inward. Ask, what within me still remembers? The light. Breathe into that, just one breath, then another. You may feel only a flicker. That is enough. That is more than enough. For in that flicker lives all the sunrise you will ever need. Before sleep, place a hand on your chest and whisper, "I have not been extinguished. I am still glowing." Say it like a vow. Say it like a return, because you are not broken. You are not gone. You are the lantern that burns without flame. Though you may forget the light never forgets you. Zen reflection. Story 11. The bowl that held the sky. The morning mist hung low across the hills, blurring the edges of the trees as if the world itself hadn't fully woken. In the kitchen, an old monk was rinsing rice in silence, his hands moving with such grace that even the water seemed to hush. I stood nearby, waiting to ask Master Genjo a question that had been growing in my heart like a stone wrapped in moss. Quiet, heavy, old. But before I could speak, he motioned to the table where a single, unadorned bowl sat. It was wide, slightly chipped, the kind of object one might overlook in a marketplace, but treasure in solitude. He poured water into it until the surface stilled, then carried it outside and placed it on the stone wall that bordered the cliff's edge. The valley below stretched far into haze, endless folds of mountain and sky. He pointed. "Look," he said. I did. At first all I saw was the bowl. But then, slowly, something deeper appeared. The water inside it had become a mirror. The blue of the morning sky curved inside its shape, soft clouds drifting across the surface like forgotten dreams. "It holds the sky," Genjo whispered. "Not because it grasps it, but because it is still." He said nothing more. And he didn't need to. I sat there long after he left, staring into that humble bowl. The sky lived in it, not through effort, not through possession, but through surrender, through stillness, through its own empty form. That image stayed with me. The bowl became more than clay. It became a question. What in me could reflect the sky if only I stopped trying to hold everything? We often believe that wisdom is something we chase. Books, teachings, achievements. But Zen suggests the opposite. That clarity comes not from accumulation, but from quiet. Not from doing, but from being. Modern life teaches us to fill every bowl we find. Fill it with goals, ideas, identity, narrative. But when the bowl is full, it cannot reflect. It only contains. And when we are only containers, we forget that we are also mirrors. In psychotherapy, there is a movement toward being with rather than fixing. Holding space for emotion without needing to resolve it. Just as a good therapist offers a reflective presence, so too can we become bowls, open, calm, able to hold what arises without reacting. But that stillness is difficult, isn't it? When anxiety floods in, we want to act. When grief rises, we want to run. When uncertainty appears, we rush to label, decide, escape. We become turbulent surfaces, breaking into waves that scatter the sky before we've even seen it. And yet, even in the chaos, the bowl waits. It does not disappear. It simply sits. There was a season in my life when I felt scattered, pulled in all directions by responsibilities and fear, always bracing, always anticipating. I tried to meditate, but my mind wouldn't still. I tried to pray, but the silence felt deafening. And then, one afternoon, I remembered the bowl. I found an old ceramic one at home, filled it with water, and placed it by the window. For days, I watched how the light fell into it, how it shimmered when the wind touched the glass. I did nothing else. No thoughts, no striving. Just sat beside it, and something shifted, not in a loud way, not in a way I could explain, but slowly the panic softened. The need to fix dissolved. I was no longer trying to hold the sky. I was simply allowing it to be reflected. The Buddha once said, "The mind is like water. When it is still, it can reflect the moon." But he did not say, "Still it with force." He simply pointed to the truth. The moon is always there. It is our movement that hides it. So too, your peace has not left you. It is only scattered by the storm. The bowl remains. Always. Tonight, before you sleep, sit in stillness. Imagine a bowl within you, wide, deep, unbroken. Inhale slowly, and as you exhale, picture the surface of the water calming. Whatever thoughts arise, let them drift like clouds. Do not chase them. Do not fight them. Just return to the breath, the bowl, the sky. You do not need to understand everything. You only need to become still enough to reflect. The wisdom you seek is not elsewhere. It is waiting within, mirrored in the open silence of your own awareness. You do not have to hold the sky. You already do. Only when the mind is still can truth shine without distortion. Zen reflection. Story 12. The guest who never knocked. The afternoon rain had passed, leaving the temple's stone paths slick with silver and scattered plum blossoms. A faint scent of earth and incense floated through the courtyard, mixing with the soft sound of sandals brushing gravel. I was walking alone, quietly rehearsing an apology I had yet to offer, when I found Master Genjo standing by the threshold of the meditation hall, gazing at the open door as if waiting for someone or something to arrive. Without turning, he said, "The guest has already entered." I looked around. There was no one. He stepped inside, motioned for me to follow, and we sat in silence for a long while, the kind of silence that does not feel empty, but inhabited. Finally, I asked, "Who is the guest?" He turned to me, eyes soft with something between joy and weariness, and said, "The one you spend your whole life preparing for, the one who comes when you stop waiting, the one who never knocks." His words sank into me like rain into dry soil, but I didn't yet understand. So he told a story, as he often did. There was a man, he said, who believed that peace, happiness, enlightenment, whatever you call it, was like a royal visitor. He cleaned his house daily, burned the best incense, set the cushions just right. He read the sacred texts aloud, thinking perhaps they would summon the guest. Years passed. No one came. One day he gave up. The tea grew cold. The house grew dusty. He sat by the window and simply watched the light move across the floor. That's when he noticed something strange. There were footprints, faint, old, leading through the house. When he followed them, he found they led not to the door, but from it. The guest had already come, and he had missed it. Master Genjo poured us both tea and said nothing more. I sat with the story, and slowly it revealed its shape. We spend so much of our lives in preparation, don't we? Preparing to be ready, to be worthy, to be healed. We clean the rooms of our hearts, hoping something grand will enter. But peace does not arrive like a king. It does not need fanfare or perfection. It slips in through the quiet moments, when we are not performing, not controlling, not waiting. In modern psychology, there's a term, hedonic treadmill. We run, always chasing the next condition for happiness, a better job, a deeper relationship, a spiritual breakthrough. But the more we run, the more distant peace becomes. It is not that peace eludes us, it's that we keep looking beyond the moment for what already lives inside it. I thought of all the times I had missed the guest in my own life. When I walked through the forest, focused on the path but blind to the light dappling the leaves. When I ate quickly, my mind elsewhere, never tasting the warmth of the food. When I held someone's hand while already planning my next words. The guest had been there, in each breath, each step, each heartbeat, but I had been absent from my own presence. Master Genjo once told me, presence is not something you create. It's what's left when you stop trying. There was a time during a difficult season of grief when I tried every method to ease the pain. Journaling, therapy, rituals, even denial. I kept the door open, hoping something would enter and take the ache away. But one morning, after a night of restless sleep, I awoke to birdsong. Not loud, not even beautiful, just there. I lay still, too tired to think, and for a few moments, I didn't do anything at all, and something settled. Not a solution, not understanding, just presence. A quiet okayness that didn't fix the wound but made space for it. The guest had been there all along. We often ask, when will I feel whole again? But wholeness is not an event. It's the space that holds both the ache and the healing, the fear and the courage, the doubt and the breath. The guest who never knocks does not need us to be ready, only present. Tonight, before you sleep, sit in stillness. Turn off the distractions. Let the world settle. Close your eyes and say softly, "Welcome." You don't need to know what you're welcoming. Just say it from the heart. You may feel nothing at first. That's okay. But notice the air on your skin, the quiet pulse in your chest, the way the dark holds you without judgment. These are the footprints, subtle, ancient, already inside your door. You do not need to seek the guest. You only need to notice they never left. Do not chase the truth. Simply drop your opinions. Zen Master Sengtsun. Story 13. The Bell That Rang Itself. It was said that long ago, before the monastery had stone walls or cedar floors, before chants echoed beneath lanterns and prayer beads clicked in rhythm with breath, there was only a single bell hung from the oldest pine tree on the hill. No monks, no rituals, no temple, just a bell. And though no one ever struck it, the villagers below swore they heard it ring. Not on schedule, not in ceremony, only when someone was ready to listen. I heard this story from a novice monk, no older than 16, who had been sent to sweep the leaves around the zazen hall. He told it casually, as if it were nothing, then returned to his broom in silence. But I could not forget it. The idea of a bell that rang itself, when the heart was still enough to hear, haunted me. In the best way, I told Master Genjo what the boy had said, and he nodded as if recalling a distant friend. Some bells, he said, are not struck from the outside. He led me that afternoon up the narrow path behind the vegetable garden, past the last maple trees of the season, until we reached a small plateau where an ancient pine stood alone. It was gnarled, knotted with age, roots coiling around stones like fingers around memory. And there, half lost in moss and rust, was the bell. It was smaller than I expected, weathered, quiet. We stood in front of it. No one moved. Wait, Genjo said. Not with your ears. So we waited, not for a sound, but for the silence to deepen. And in that silence, I felt something strange, like a hum that wasn't in the air, but in me. Not audible, but unmistakable. A vibration of presence, of attention, a moment that felt like a held breath, like a question asked without words. I didn't hear the bell ring, but I understood. We often think of awakening, insight, or transformation as something loud, dramatic, like lightning striking, like a teacher, shouting like a sudden revelation that turns the soul inside out. But most of the time, it's quieter than that, more intimate. It doesn't break through noise. It waits beneath it. In Zen, there's a saying, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. But often the teacher is not a person. Sometimes it's a moment, a falling leaf, a child's laugh, a bowl of rice, a bell that rings without being touched. In therapy and modern mindfulness, we talk about non-doing, a state in which insight arises not because we pushed for it, but because we finally stopped pushing. When the mind settles, the heart speaks, and what it says is rarely what we expect. For years I searched for signs, of meaning, of right choices, of whether I was on the correct path. I wanted clear messages, confirmation, something loud enough to cut through doubt. I looked to others, I scoured books, I even asked the sky once or twice, half joking, but I missed the soft rings, the ones inside stillness, the ones that came not when I begged for them, but when I was simply present. Once, during a period of deep uncertainty, I had taken a walk at dawn. I didn't want to meditate. I didn't want to read. I didn't want to think. So I just walked. The streets were empty, the wind low, and I passed a tree I must have walked past 100 times. But that morning, something made me stop. A single raindrop fell from its lowest branch and landed on the back of my hand. It was cold, sharp, real. And in that moment, I realized I was alive, not in theory, not in language, but in sensation. It was enough. That was the bell. Master Genjo always said, "You will not hear the bell while listening for the bell. You will hear it when you listen to nothing at all." This is the paradox of awakening. It arrives not as a thing added, but as a veil lifted, a sound not introduced but revealed. It's not something new, it's something always there, waiting in the background, like silence beneath song. Tonight, before sleep, sit in stillness, not to meditate, not to achieve, just to be. Close your eyes. Let your breath slow, not by force, but by noticing. Let the thoughts pass like clouds. Let the body rest like a hill beneath fog. And then, do nothing. Wait, not expectantly, but gently. You may not hear a bell, but you may feel the echo of one you've been missing your whole life. It won't be loud. It won't be logical. It will be like a truth you've always known. And it will ask nothing of you but presence. When the mind is silent, the heart hears. Zen reflection. Story 14. The shadow that bowed first. It was late in the day when the sun began to stretch shadows long across the temple courtyard. The low golden light bathed the stone lanterns, the moss-lined walls, and even the crows perched quietly on the tiled roofs in a kind of suspended stillness. I had been sweeping fallen leaves for over an hour, my back aching, and my thoughts even more tangled than the branches overhead. The monotony of the task had left me restless, tired not from effort, but from the mental noise that always seemed to fill the silences I didn't know how to welcome. Then I saw it, my shadow. It moved slightly ahead of me on the ground, long and bent in the light. It mirrored my every action, even the tension in my shoulders, the slight stoop in my spine, the hesitation in my arms. I stopped. So did it. I bowed my head, letting the broom rest in my hands, and to my surprise, the shadow bowed first. That's when Master Genjo stepped quietly behind me and said, "Only what is low can receive the light." I turned. He didn't elaborate. He simply walked on, slow and steady, as if trusting that the words would do their work without needing to be pushed. I stood there for a long time, broom forgotten, the wind curling gently around me like an old lullaby. My shadow still bent in front of me, long and quiet, and something inside me, a tightness I hadn't noticed, began to loosen. There is something humbling about our shadows. They follow us without protest, without noise. They do not argue, and they do not flatter. They do not judge. They do not forget. They are with us when we rise and when we fall, and most of all, they appear only when we stand in the light. In Zen, the shadow is not the enemy. It is not to be eliminated. It is to be seen, embraced, bowed to. Modern psychology, especially Jungian thought, speaks of the shadow self, the parts of us we hide, reject, or repress. Our anger, our fear, our shame, our envy. These parts do not vanish when ignored. They fester, distort, return in disguise. But when acknowledged, without judgment, they soften, they integrate, they offer gifts. Every human being carries stories they do not tell, wounds they do not name, failures they pretend never happened. But these too are part of the whole. These too deserve a place in the light. I remember a time in my life when I tried to become only what was good, what was wise, what was light. I wanted to be calm. I wanted to be kind. I wanted to be free of the chaos I saw in others, and, more quietly, in myself. So I forced it. I suppressed every outburst. I polished every word. I carried a mask of grace so heavy it left bruises beneath. But the more I denied the shadow, the heavier it grew, until one day it broke through, not in a grand failure, but in a quiet one. I forgot to respond to someone who needed me. Not because I didn't care, but because I was too busy pretending to be more available than I was. The guilt that followed wasn't about the mistake, it was about the illusion cracking. And in that crack, something real finally entered. I sat down that evening and wrote a letter, not to the person I had failed, but to the part of myself I had abandoned. The tired part, the angry part, the frightened part, the one I had locked in the basement of my being. I said, I see you. I'm sorry. You can come upstairs now. I wept as I wrote, and I realized the shadow bows not in shame, but in reverence. It bows first. It is humble. It is honest. And when we bow back, the division between light and dark dissolves. That is wholeness. The Buddha taught that enlightenment is not the absence of imperfection, but the total embrace of reality, just as it is. Not because everything is pure, but because nothing needs to be excluded. Even the shadow is sacred, especially the shadow. So tonight, before you sleep, sit in the quiet. Let the lights dim. Let the edges of things blur. Then close your eyes and ask yourself, what part of me have I been turning away from? Wait, let it approach. You may feel discomfort, or sorrow, or resistance. That is okay. Do not fix. Do not explain. Just acknowledge. Then, bow, not in submission, but in union. You are not here to eliminate the shadow. You are here to become spacious enough to hold it, just as the sky holds the night. The shadow is not darkness. It is light that has turned inward. Zen reflection. Story 15. The thread beneath the stone. There was a path behind the bell tower, half forgotten and covered with moss, winding through the oldest part of the monastery grounds. The stones were uneven, roots pushing through the earth like veins beneath skin, and walking it required a slower pace, the kind that makes you listen to your steps. I found myself drawn to it one late afternoon, when the wind had quieted, and the sky was turning the soft colour of old paper. I didn't know why I was walking there. I only knew I needed to. Halfway down the trail, I stopped. One of the stones beneath my foot wobbled slightly, as if disturbed. When I leaned down to adjust it, I noticed something strange. A thin red thread, barely visible, running under the stone and disappearing into the soil beyond. It was so out of place, delicate against roughness, soft against the stubborn grey of rock. When I mentioned it to Master Genjo later that evening, he said nothing at first. Then he stirred the ashes in the small brazier beside us and said, "There is always a thread." I waited, but he didn't explain, and so I sat with it. And the more I sat, the more I understood. Life often feels like a scattered path, moments disconnected, joys fleeting, pain appearing without reason, people arriving and leaving without warning. We move from job to job, city to city, love to heartbreak, and back again. And sometimes it feels like it's all just fragments, an endless series of unconnected events. But sometimes, if you pause just long enough, you begin to sense the thread. Not as a visible rope pulling you forward, not as a grand destiny, but as a quiet continuity, a presence beneath the noise, a story told not in words, but in movement, in breath, in memory, in the way your heart softens when you hear a certain melody, or the way you know something is true even when you can't explain why. There's a Zen saying, the path is not found in the map, but in your footsteps. And your footsteps are never random. Modern psychology talks about narrative identity, the way we construct meaning by weaving our experiences into story. But Zen offers something subtler. It doesn't ask you to name the thread. It only asks that you feel it. Trust it, even when it disappears beneath the stone. There was a time in my life when I felt adrift. A job I had worked hard for came to an end. A relationship that once felt like home unraveled. And beneath it all, a question began to pulse. Had I wasted my time? I searched for meaning. I looked for signs, but nothing came. Just silence. Until one day, walking alone near a river, I saw a child drop a stick into the current. It floated, spinning and bobbing, carried by something invisible. It didn't resist. It didn't know its destination. It only moved. And watching it, I wept. Not because I found an answer, but because I no longer needed one. I saw then that life wasn't wasted. It was woven. The thread was still there. Beneath the job, beneath the love, beneath the loss. It had carried me without my knowing. It would continue to do so. Master Genjo once said, "A stone may forget the thread, but the thread never forgets the stone." We want to control the narrative, to understand the why, the when, the where. But sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is trust that the thread is real even when you can't see it. And that thread may be silence, or breath, or love that outlives its form, or the way you keep showing up, even when you feel broken, confused, unfinished. Tonight, before sleep, sit quietly. Picture your life like a path, full of stones, some smooth, some sharp. See the steps you've taken, the turns you regret, the places you stayed too long, the places you left too soon. Then imagine a thin thread beneath it all. You do not need to name it. Only feel it. It connects everything, and it has never let go of you. You are not lost. You are being woven. Though the thread disappears beneath the stone, it never breaks. Zen Reflection. Story 16. The mountain that moved by staying still. The first snow of the year arrived without warning. Not in heavy storms or dramatic winds, but in a quiet hush that fell over the temple roofs like the exhale of the sky. I had been sweeping the courtyard when the flakes began to drift down, melting on the warm stone before I could catch them. There was no announcement, no shift in the air, just snow. Suddenly, gently, there. Later that day, I found Master Genjo sitting beneath the ancient cedar tree that stood like a sentinel above the cliff. The snow had begun to settle around him, but he didn't brush it away. He let it fall, on his shoulders, his sleeves, his knees. From a distance, he looked like part of the mountain itself. When I approached, he said nothing, just looked out into the valley and then gestured to the horizon. I followed his gaze and saw the mountain, wide, unmoved, half shrouded in mist. "Do you know how it came to be there?" he asked. I shook my head. "It moved," he said, "by staying still." At first, I thought he meant something metaphorical, but then I remembered. Mountains are not born as they are. They rise through pressure, through slow shifts beneath the surface of the earth. They grow imperceptibly, inch by inch, over centuries, not through striving, not through noise, but through presence, through endurance, through stillness that is never truly still. And suddenly, the snow made sense. I had been feeling restless again, the kind of restlessness that doesn't come from lack of effort, but from the aching need for change, for progress. I wanted to see results in my practice, in my healing, in my becoming. I wanted signs that things were working, that I was getting somewhere. But the more I pushed, the more stagnant I felt, like walking in place, like chasing my own breath. Master Genjo once told me, sometimes the path is not forward, it's deeper. And now I understood. The mountain does not move like a traveler. It moves like time, like growth, like wisdom. In Western psychology, we often talk about transformation in terms of breakthrough, insight, catharsis, sudden change. But trauma, healing, and self-understanding often unfold like mountains, quietly, slowly, invisibly. What appears unchanged on the surface may be shifting deeply within. We live in a culture of urgency, of immediate results, of measuring worth by visible achievement. But Zen invites us into another rhythm, one not of acceleration, but of deepening. There was a period in my life when I felt like nothing I did mattered. The routines I kept, the words I spoke, the practices I clung to, all felt like gestures made into empty space. I feared I was wasting time, that my stillness was stagnation. But then, a year later, someone I loved told me that I had become softer, more present, that my silence felt like a place they could rest in. I hadn't noticed the change, because it had grown like a mountain, beneath the noise, beneath the self-judgment, beneath the days that felt like failure. Not all change announces itself. Sometimes it waits until the snow falls, until the air clears, until you look back and realize you have risen, and you didn't even see it happen. The Buddha once sat beneath a tree for 49 days, not to escape the world, but to be with it fully. He became unmoving, not as resistance, but as devotion. He became the mountain, and in that stillness, he saw everything. So tonight, if you feel stuck, if you feel like nothing is shifting, sit with this truth. Stillness is not the absence of progress. It is the birthplace of it. Close your eyes. Feel the weight of your body on the earth. Breathe. Imagine yourself as a mountain, not one that climbs, but one that rises. Feel the ground beneath, you shifting unseen. Let go of the need to rush. Let go of the belief that movement must be fast, that growth must be visible, that change must feel good. Let yourself be the slow revolution of stone. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are becoming vast. You are becoming strong. And one day, someone will look to you, not for your height, but for your stillness, and they will find peace there. The mountain does not speak, and yet it teaches everything. Zen Reflection, Story 17. The Bridge That Waited. It was a pale grey morning when the fog rolled in low and heavy, curling through the monastery grounds like a slow breath. The trees stood silent, veiled in the drifting white, and the world felt smaller, quieter, as though the sky itself had decided to whisper. I wandered without aim, feet brushing fallen pine needles, until I came upon an old wooden bridge I had never seen before. It stretched across a narrow gorge where a stream ran below, unseen but clearly heard, the water's song echoing like memory in a closed room. The bridge was weathered but sturdy, its planks darkened by time and mist. I stood at its entrance and waited, though I didn't know why. Maybe it was the fog. Maybe the sound of water. Maybe the quiet inside me that asked to be met with silence outside. That's when Master Genjo appeared, as if from the mist itself, his robe rustling softly, As he approached, "You found the waiting bridge," he said. I looked at him. Waiting for what? He stepped beside me and didn't answer right away. Instead, he placed one foot on the bridge, but didn't cross. Then he turned to me. "There was once a young man," he said, "who came upon a river that marked the boundary between his known world and everything beyond. The bridge across it was ancient, unused, and the fog hid what lay on the other side. He was afraid, not of falling, but of crossing. So he stood at the edge, day after day, asking others what was beyond, reading scrolls, meditating, waiting for certainty, and the bridge waited with him." I looked again at the boards beneath us, worn smooth by weather but not by footsteps. It felt like a metaphor, but more than that, like a mirror. "How long did he wait?" I asked. Genjo's eyes softened. As long as it took to realize that the bridge was not asking him to believe in the other side, only to take one step. Silence settled between us, like a hand on the shoulder. We live much of our lives near bridges, thresholds between who we have been and who we are becoming, between the known and the unknown, between the safety of repetition and the trembling of transformation. We stand at the edge with our questions. What if I'm not ready? What if I regret it? What if it doesn't work? And so we wait. But sometimes the bridge is not a test. It is an invitation. Modern psychology often speaks of ambivalence in change, the push and pull between desire and fear. We want to heal, but we're afraid of losing who we were. We want to love, but we're afraid of being hurt. We want to leap, but we are terrified of falling. But healing, like crossing, doesn't demand certainty, only honesty, only movement, only breath. I remember a time when I stood at such a bridge in my life, not literal, but just as real. A decision that asked me to leave behind a role, a pattern, a person I thought I needed to survive. I knew it would change everything. And yet, I waited. I meditated. I analyzed. I asked others what they thought. I built altars to clarity, but clarity never came. Until I stepped, and only then did I see. The other side was never what I imagined. It wasn't ease. It wasn't certainty. It was simply a new path, waiting to teach me who I had become in the waiting. Master Genjo once said, "Not every bridge must be crossed, but if it calls to your feet, trust they have been prepared by the waiting itself." Crossing does not mean abandoning what you've known. It means honoring it by allowing it to end. Not all thresholds are loud. Some arrive like fog. Some arrive like an ache that doesn't leave. Some arrive like a truth you whisper into your pillow at night and hope no one else hears. But the bridge hears. It waits. It always has. Tonight, if you feel you are standing at the edge of something you cannot name, know this. You are not lost. You are not late. You are listening. And that too is sacred. Close your eyes. Breathe deeply. Picture the bridge before you, not as pressure, but as presence. Ask yourself, what have I been waiting for that already lives inside my breath? Then, take a step, not forward necessarily, but inward. Even one step onto the bridge changes you, because in crossing, even in the attempt, you honor your longing, and longing is the soul's map to its next chapter. The bridge appears when the foot begins to move. Zen Reflection. Story 18. The Candle That Didn't Fear the Wind. The wind was stronger than usual that evening. It rushed through the pines like a great invisible river, making the chimes above the prayer hall sing wildly, not in harmony, but in a language only the trees could understand. I was helping close the wooden shutters when I noticed a single candle burning just outside the old scriptorium. It had been left on a low stone ledge, likely forgotten by one of the monks copying texts during dusk. What startled me was not that it remained, it was that it was still burning. The wind whipped through the corridor, yet the flame danced steadily, never extinguished. I watched it for minutes, entranced. It flickered, yes. It bent and bowed and trembled in the gusts. But it never went out. The flame lived not in resistance, but in its ability to move with what threatened to erase it. When I later told Master Genjo about the candle, he nodded, as if recalling something long known. There are two kinds of strength, he said. The kind that hardens, and the kind that surrenders. He poured hot tea into our cups and continued with a story. There was once a candle that burned in a temple high on the mountain, where storms were frequent and fierce. All the other candles, thick and proud, burned brightly when the wind was still, but they would shudder and die when the gusts came. Only one candle, small and unassuming, never failed. It didn't resist the wind. It let itself move with it. Its flame bent low but never broke. The other candles called it weak, but it was the only one that endured. I thought of all the ways we are taught to be strong, to stand firm, to not be shaken, to hold the same shape in all conditions. But Zen teaches something else. That strength is not always what remains unmoved. Sometimes strength is what bends without breaking, what feels deeply and stays open, what flickers and still burns. In modern psychology, we often talk about emotional resilience, the ability not to avoid pain, but to recover, not to be untouched by difficulty, but to adapt through it. The flame of such a person may shake, dim, even nearly vanish, but it endures because it allows movement. It breathes with the winds of life instead of fighting them. There was a time in my life when everything I counted on seemed to unravel. Plans I had trusted fell apart. People I leaned on pulled away. I tried to hold myself together through discipline, through logic, through endless effort. But I grew brittle. I cracked in places I hadn't realized were fragile. One evening, after a particularly long day of holding it all in, I sat alone in the dark and lit a single candle. I watched it for hours, watched it flicker, dance, lean and straighten, and in that quiet, I understood. I didn't need to stay unshaken. I needed to stay present. My flame didn't need to be perfect. It only needed to be alive. That changed everything. I stopped trying to control the wind, and I started tending the flame. There's a passage in the Dhammapada that reads, "As a strong wind cannot move a mountain, a wise person is not moved by praise or blame. But wisdom is not coldness. It is warmth that survives, fire that listens, a heart that keeps offering light even in the storm." Master Genjo often said, "It is easy to shine when the world is calm, but the candle teaches us how to love in chaos. The world will blow through us, with change, with loss, with fear. We cannot hold it back. We are not meant to. Our work is not to resist every gust, but to remember our own source of light. The candle burns not because the air is still, but because the flame knows how to dance. Tonight, before you sleep, light a candle if you can. Watch it for a while. Sit with it in silence. See how it trembles, how it moves, how it survives. Then close your eyes and ask yourself, what wind have I been trying to fight? Breathe into that question. Let your own inner flame respond, not with words, but with warmth. You do not have to be unshaken. You only have to remain lit and trust that even a flickering light still gives warmth, still makes a difference, still keeps the dark at bay. A candle loses nothing by lighting another flame. Zen reflection. Story 19. The rain that didn't ask why. It had been raining for 3 days. A gentle, steady kind of rain. Not fierce, not dramatic, but persistent. The sort of rain that seeps into everything, softening the soil, blurring the edges of paths, turning footsteps into quiet, muddied impressions. The monastery grew quieter during such weather. The birds stayed hidden. The bells rang softer. Even the monks seemed to walk more slowly, as if time itself were dissolving in the mist. I stood beneath the overhang outside the calligraphy room, watching droplets gather on the edge of the roof and fall, one by one, into the stone basin below. Plink, plink, plink. Each drop making its own tiny mark in the surface of the water before vanishing into stillness. I must have watched 100 drops fall. Then Master Genjo appeared beside me. He didn't say anything for a while, just watched, as I did. Then quietly, almost like a thought spoken aloud, he said, "The rain never asks why it falls." I turned to look at him. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. Something in me recognized the truth before my mind could catch up. We spend much of our lives asking why. Why did this happen? Why me? Why now? We seek reason, clarity, meaning, especially in suffering, especially in confusion, as if understanding could make the pain lighter, as if explanation could offer peace. But the rain doesn't question its falling. It doesn't resist its nature. It doesn't need permission to descend or meaning to justify its motion. It simply is. It nourishes. It softens. It disappears. And still, its presence changes the world. There's a story in Zen about a monk who went to his master in tears, overwhelmed by grief. "Why must I feel this?" he asked. "Why does it hurt so much?" The master didn't answer. Instead, he opened the window and pointed to the sky. Rain was falling. "Is the sky sad?" he asked. The monk didn't answer. "Is the rain wrong?" the master said. And in the silence that followed, the monk began to cry. Not from despair, but from recognition. The grief didn't need a reason. It only needed space. Modern therapy often encourages us to explore our pasts, to trace patterns, to find roots. This can be deeply healing. But there are moments when no story explains the ache. When pain arises not from memory, but from being human. When our hearts feel heavy, not because of trauma, but because they are open. And in those moments, asking why can become a form of resistance, a subtle refusal to allow what already is. We think we seek understanding, but sometimes we are seeking control. I remember once during a time of deep emotional fatigue, I asked myself over and over, why am I feeling this way? There was no event to point to, no crisis, no betrayal, just a heaviness that arrived unannounced. I journaled, I analyzed, I searched, but the more I searched, the tighter it became. Until one afternoon, I stopped asking. I went for a walk in the rain, without an umbrella. I let the drops fall where they pleased. I didn't flinch. I didn't wipe them away. And in that silent surrender, something inside me shifted. Not because I found the cause, but because I finally made room for the feeling to exist without needing to be justified. The rain, I realized, had nothing to prove, and neither did I. Master Genjo once said, "Peace does not come from answers. It comes from making space for the unanswered." In Buddhist thought, there is the concept of dukkha, often translated as suffering, but more accurately, it is the discomfort that arises from trying to make what is impermanent permanent, from trying to hold what cannot be held, from trying to explain what only needs to be felt. The rain falls, the heart aches, the tears come, not as punishment, but as part of the path. Tonight, if you are carrying something heavy, if a sorrow has arrived without name or reason, do not rush to solve it. Do not demand an answer. Sit with it. Let it fall. Close your eyes. Listen to your breath. Feel the sensation of the moment as it is. Not how it should be, not how you want it to be, but how it is. If tears come, let them. If silence comes, welcome it. If nothing comes at all, honor that too. You are not broken. You are reigning. And that too is sacred. The rain falls on the just and the unjust alike. It asks no questions. It only gives. Zen Reflection. Story 20. The Door That Opened the Other Way. There was a wooden door at the back of the library hall, small, curved at the top, barely taller than a person. Most who came to the monastery never noticed it. It didn't face the usual path, and its hinges had grown silent with time. I had walked past it many times myself, assuming it was locked or unused, just another forgotten relic in a place already full of old beauty. But one morning, after waking from a dream I could not remember, but whose feeling clung like mist to my ribs, I found myself standing in front of it. My hand reached for the handle without conscious thought. I tried to push. It didn't move. I pushed again, a little harder. Nothing. For some reason, I did not give up. I placed my palm flat, leaned in, and then paused. I pulled, and the door opened, not out into the world, but inward. The room behind it was small, simple. A single window let in a shaft of golden morning light that fell across the wooden floor like a blessing. There was a cushion, an empty bowl, and nothing else. That was when Master Genjo appeared behind me. I hadn't heard his approach. He looked at the open door and said, "Most doors that matter do not open the way we expect." I looked back at the threshold. It was still ajar, as though waiting for me to understand something deeper than what the eyes could see. "Why do we always push?" I asked him. He didn't smile, but his eyes did. "Because we think everything outside us must yield," he said. "But some truths invite us to enter by yielding ourselves." He stepped into the small room, sat cross-legged on the cushion, and motioned for me to join him. I did. We sat in silence for a long while. The air was still, and yet I could feel the world rearranging itself quietly, subtly, the way a river moves around a stone without needing to fight it. So much of our life is spent pushing. We push for answers, for love, for control. We push against pain, against silence, against anything that does not yield to our will. We are told that strength is force, that courage is confrontation, that doors must be broken open if they do not move. But Zen teaches another kind of strength, the kind that pulls back, that steps aside, that listens. In therapy, there's a concept called psychological flexibility, the ability to shift our perspective, to stop struggling with thoughts and instead observe them. Those who learn to step back rather than push forward blindly often heal faster, feel more whole, and suffer less, because suffering grows in resistance and peace enters through surrender. There was a time when I tried to force every answer, in my life. When I was hurt, I demanded closure. When I was lost, I demanded clarity. When I was lonely, I demanded connection. I banged on every door with trembling fists, and most stayed closed. Not because they were locked, but because I was facing the wrong way. I remember one day in particular sitting alone with a decision that I could not make. I had prayed, journaled, asked for signs. Nothing came. In frustration, I gave up. Not in despair, but in quiet exhaustion. I let go of the question. I stopped knocking, and something shifted. Not outside, inside. A door I didn't even know existed creaked open. It wasn't loud. It didn't come with visions or certainty. Just a sense of quiet alignment. A soft yes. Not from the world, from within. Master Genjo once told me, when the door opens inward, you will discover the room was inside you all along. That's when I understood. Most of the doors we push are metaphors. What we call obstacles are often mirrors. They do not block our way. They show us how we meet the world, with force or with presence, with expectation or with inquiry, with clenched fists or open hands. Tonight, if you feel you're standing before a closed door, an unanswered prayer, a silence that won't speak, a truth that won't reveal itself, pause, don't push, instead, breathe. Place your hand gently against the moment, then pull, not out of force, but out of willingness, and see what opens, not in front of you, but within. You may find that what you've been waiting for isn't on the other side of the door. It is in the space that opens when you stop trying to break it down. Let go of pushing. The heart opens the other way. Zen Reflection. Story 21. The window that faced nowhere. There was a window in the oldest part of the monastery, small, square, framed by wood, darkened with time. It opened not to the garden, not to the mountains, not to the great forest beyond. It faced a blank, stone wall, no view, no horizon, just grey stone, cool and unmoving. Most of the younger monks paid it no mind. Some joked about it, others called it the useless window. But one afternoon, during a week when my mind would not stop spinning, tangled in questions with no clear answer, regrets I couldn't untangle, and futures I couldn't yet see, I found myself drawn to it. Maybe it was the stillness of the stone. Maybe it was the silence in the air. Maybe it was just the need to rest my gaze on something that didn't ask anything of me. I sat before the window and stared. At first, it felt pointless. My thoughts continued. My body fidgeted, but I stayed. And slowly, something shifted. The more I looked, the more the wall began to soften, not literally, but inside me. It was as though the blankness became a kind of invitation, not to think, not to analyze, but to be. The wall did not change, but I did. Later that day, when I mentioned this to Master Genjo, he nodded, unsurprised. That window, he said, was built for those who have stopped needing to look elsewhere. He poured tea with his usual unhurried grace, then added, "It's not a window to the outside, it's a mirror for the inside." I sipped my tea in silence. His words echoed longer than usual. We live in a world of views. We're taught to seek them. Beautiful horizons, new landscapes, distant goals. Every window must show us something. Every moment must take us somewhere. Even our thoughts chase meaning like hounds through the forest, desperate to arrive, to prove we are moving forward. But what if the deepest part of our journey happens in stillness? What if some windows are not for seeing more, but for seeing less? In Zen, there is a deep reverence for the ordinary, for what is plain, unadorned, present, the sound of footsteps in gravel, the feel of warm tea in cold hands, a window that faces a wall, because in those moments the mind loses its distractions, and in the absence of something out there, we are gently returned to what's in here. In Western psychology, this is sometimes called radical acceptance, the ability to sit with what is, without resistance, without needing to change or escape it. It is a profound practice, and often it begins not with dramatic events, but with simple, repetitive encounters, folding clothes, washing dishes, sitting before a blank wall. I remember a time when everything around me was uncertain, a transition, a fracture, the sense of no clear path forward. I searched for answers, consulted mentors, read endlessly, but the more I looked outward, the more disoriented I became. Then one morning, drained from trying, I sat down beside a plain wall in my apartment. I didn't mean to meditate. I didn't mean to do anything. I just needed not to move. And something strange happened. I stopped needing an answer, not because I found one, but because I saw that I was still here, even without one, still breathing, still whole, still enough. The wall hadn't moved, but my need for movement had. Master Genjo once said, "The moment you stop demanding life to give you more is the moment you receive what cannot be taken away." I think that's what the window teaches. It gives you nothing, on purpose. And in that nothingness, you meet yourself. You begin to realize that peace isn't found in having a view. It's found in no longer needing one. Tonight, before sleep, find a quiet place. Turn off the lights. Sit near a blank wall if you can. Let your eyes rest softly on it, not to examine, not to search, but just to allow your gaze to land. Let the silence wrap around you. Breathe and ask gently, if this moment had nothing to offer, could I still remain? Wait for the answer, not with your mind, but with your breath. You may discover a kind of freedom you didn't know you were seeking. The freedom of not needing the view to change in order to feel peace. Because sometimes the clearest window is the one that shows you nothing. When you stop looking for the way finds you. Zen reflection. Story 22. The ladder that led down. There was an old ladder leaning against the inner wall of the west cloister. It wasn't tall, perhaps 8 or 10 rungs, and unlike most ladders, it didn't reach upward toward the roof or attic. It pointed downward into a small stone opening, a square in the floor hidden beneath a mat of woven reeds. Most walked past it without notice, assuming it led to storage or forgotten tools. But one day, in a moment when my mind felt stretched and thin from holding too much questions, regrets, distractions, fears, I sat by that opening. I lifted the mat, stared into the dark, and for a long while, I just looked. There was nothing visibly special below, just a quiet cellar, lined with rock and shadows. The air was cool, still, undemanding. Then Master Genjo arrived and stood behind me. He didn't ask what I was doing. He only said, "It's not the ladder that changes your life. It's the direction you choose to climb." I looked at him, confused. "Down?" He smiled faintly. "Yes, sometimes down. We are taught to climb, to rise, to ascend. In school, in careers, in life, we are encouraged to go up, to improve, to elevate. Even spiritual language is filled with words like higher self, enlightenment, ascension. Everything moves upward. And yet, the deepest healing I have ever experienced has always come from going down, into the body, into the pain, into the root of what I was trying not to feel. I decided to climb the ladder. It was narrow and creaked beneath me. The stone walls were damp, the floor cold. There were no sacred scrolls down there, no relics, no light streaming in from windows. Just stillness and breath. I sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by earth and silence. At first, it felt like nothing. Then it felt like everything. All the things I'd pushed aside, the sadness I hadn't cried out, the guilt I hadn't forgiven, the longing I hadn't honored, they began to arrive, one by one, not like ghosts, but like old friends. Not to accuse me, but to be acknowledged. I didn't fight them. I didn't fix them. I simply sat and let them exist. And in doing so, something softened. There is a phrase in Buddhist psychology, touching the earth. When the Buddha was challenged, under the Bodhi tree, asked what right he had to seek awakening, he didn't argue. He simply placed one hand upon the earth. That was his answer. The ground bears witness to all things, and sometimes we must go down to remember who we are beneath the striving. In therapy, this descent is often called integration. It's not about staying in the dark, but about reclaiming what was exiled. The child within us who was told not to cry, the dream we buried to be responsible, the fear we pretended not to feel, all waiting at the bottom of the ladder. And when we go down, not to escape, but to meet, something beautiful happens. Not dramatic, not loud, just real. We become whole. Master Genjo once said, "The fruit does not ripen on the highest branch. It ripens when it touches the soil." I stayed in that cellar until the shadows no longer felt like strangers. Then I climbed back up, not transformed, not radiant, but honest. I no longer needed to be above it all, because I had met myself below it all. And that was enough. Tonight, before sleep, sit quietly. Close your eyes. Picture a ladder, not rising toward the sky, but descending gently into the quiet heart of your being. Ask, what have I left behind in my pursuit to rise? Then breathe, and begin your descent, not with fear, but with reverence. Down into memory, down into softness, down into the earth of your own presence. Because some truths live low, some peace waits in the cellar, and some ladders were never meant to reach the heavens, but to return you to yourself. Before the mountain, there is the valley. Before the light, the deep. Zen Reflection. Story 23. The mirror that reflected backwards. At the far end of the hall of quiet practices, past the shelves of incense and bowls of tea leaves, there was a small room most visitors never noticed. Its only furniture was a wooden bench and a single object, a mirror, square, plain, and slightly tarnished at the edges. Unlike most mirrors, this one was not hung on a wall. It rested on the floor, tilted gently backward, angled not to reflect faces or forms, but the ceiling above, wooden beams, old dust, slivers of light. Nothing remarkable. Yet it drew me in like a memory I hadn't yet remembered. One morning, after a restless night of dreams without shape or clarity, I found myself sitting before it. I didn't look at myself. I didn't try to interpret. I simply sat, watching what it chose to show. The ceiling, the motionless air, a drifting cobweb that caught the light like silk. There was no urgency in that reflection, no judgment, no need to offer meaning, only stillness, bending light. Later, Master Genjo found me there. He didn't speak at first. He looked into the mirror, as I had done, then quietly asked, "What did it show you?" "Nothing," I said. He nodded. "Then it's finally working." That stayed with me. The idea that a mirror could work by showing nothing, that emptiness could be its gift, that not everything must reflect us to be meaningful. He sat beside me, his knees creaking as they bent, and spoke as one might read a letter written long ago. "There was once a mirror," he said, "crafted not to reflect the present, but the past. Not faces, but echoes. Whoever looked into it did not see who they were, but who they once had been, before the world told them who to become. Some were frightened by what they saw, some wept, some laughed, but all recognized something they had forgotten, a softness, a clarity, a wild, unnameable light." I remained still, listening not just to the words, but to the space between them. He continued, "Most mirrors reflect forward, what others see, what we expect, what we perform. But healing often begins when we reflect backward, to the quiet self beneath the layers, the one that was never lost, only hidden. In modern psychology, we speak of inner child work, the process of returning to early versions of ourselves, meeting those younger parts with compassion, with curiosity, with care. Not to stay in the past, but to reconnect with what we buried to survive. Zen does not look back through chronology. It looks back through presence. It asks, who are you when you are not trying to be anyone? Sitting before the mirror, I remembered being a child lying in tall grass, watching clouds pass as if they carried messages only I could read. I remembered the strange joy of not knowing, of having no destination. I remembered silence, not as loneliness, but as intimacy, and I realized I had not grown out of that self. I had grown over it, covered it with striving, with story, with the endless need to reflect what others recognized. But that original self, that wild, clear awareness, was still beneath it all, waiting like the ceiling in the mirror, plain, steady, unapplauded, real. Master Genjo once told me, "Your true face is not the one you polish. It's the one you forget you're wearing." There was a time in my life when I could not bear my own reflection. Not because I disliked how I looked, but because I didn't know who I was seeing. My eyes were tired, my smile rehearsed. I had become a shape others understood, but I had lost the shape I understood inside. Then one evening, I sat with no mirror, no audience, no tasks. Just breath, just space. And something returned. A gentleness, not a voice, not a vision. Just a presence that said, "You are still here." And that was enough. So now, when I sit before the mirror in that quiet room, I don't seek answers. I watch what reflects, and I welcome what doesn't. Because the past is not a prison. It is a seed. And even the forgotten parts of us still bloom when met with attention. Tonight, before you sleep, sit in front of a window, or a mirror, or simply close your eyes. Ask not who you are now, but who you were before the noise, before the masks, before the names. Wait. Do not dig. Do not rush. Let the memory come if it wishes. Let the feeling rise. Even if it shows you nothing, stay, that nothing is sacred. It is space. It is invitation. And sometimes the deepest healing begins not when you learn something new, but when you remember something old. Before you knew your name, you already belonged to the sky. Zen reflection. Story 24. The garden that grew after the goodbye. It had once been a garden. That much was clear, though now it looked more like memory than place, overgrown, uneven, vines creeping up rusted trellises, wildflowers blooming in colours no one had planted. The gate was always slightly ajar, as though someone had left in a hurry and forgotten to close it. I came across it by accident during one of my early morning walks, drawn by the scent of damp earth and jasmine. I stepped inside without thinking. The ground was soft, the paths half erased. Everything felt touched by time, but not abandoned. More, like it had been left to become what it wished, without pruning, without design. I wandered through it quietly, noticing how the chaos felt alive, not broken, not untamed, just free. Master Genjo found me there the following evening. He stood beside the gate and said, "This was once the most carefully tended garden in the monastery." I turned to him. "What happened?" He walked in, letting his fingers brush a branch of mint that had climbed across a bench. "The monk who cared for it left," he said, "without warning, without a plan. He had held on too long, trying to make things stay as they were, but something in him knew. It was time." He bent to pick up a small fallen plum from the ground. I asked him once why he didn't say goodbye. He looked at me and said, "Some things only bloom after you leave them." The words fell into me like a stone into still water. How many times had I held on too long, to relationships that had already wilted, to identities I had outgrown, to patterns that once protected me but now confined me. We are taught to value staying, to endure, to try harder. Letting go is often framed as failure. Leaving is treated like abandonment. But what if some departures are sacred? What if some doors must close so a garden can grow wild and full and honest? In Zen, we speak often of impermanence, but what we rarely speak of is the wisdom in departure, the truth that sometimes the most compassionate act is not staying, but stepping away with presence and love. Modern psychology echoes this. Studies on attachment show us that secure bonds are not those that never shift, but those that can evolve without fear. And sometimes, evolution means release. There was a time when I stayed too long in a version of myself that no longer fit. I clung to a career, a relationship, a city, all because I feared what would happen if I let them go. I called it commitment, but really it was control. And when it all began to unravel, as life inevitably does, I blamed myself. Until one evening, I sat in silence and asked, what if this isn't the end? The question itself was enough, not an answer, a loosening, like the first breeze that signals autumn. Master Genjo once told me, "You cannot grow if your roots are tied in knots." The garden that monk left behind was never replanted. No one took it over. No one tried to tame it. And yet, season after season, it bloomed. Wild herbs grew beside old tulips. Ferns unfurled near cracked stone pots. And every spring, a single cherry tree blossomed near the gate as if to say, "See?" Letting go did not mean forgetting. It meant becoming. Tonight, if you are holding on to something that no longer feeds your soul, a path, a version of yourself, a hope that's turned heavy, sit quietly and ask, what might grow if I let this go? You do not need to decide tonight. You do not need to act. You only need to ask. because even the question plants a seed. Close your eyes. Breathe. Picture the gate. It does not close behind you. It opens into something you cannot yet name. And just beyond it, a garden waits, not perfect, but real, wild, true. Some flowers only bloom after the gardener leaves. Zen reflection. Story 25. The Path That Returned. The final path from the monastery led into the forest, not paved, not marked, just a trail worn into the earth by centuries of wandering feet. It was the path no one spoke of directly, though all monks walked it eventually. It curved gently around the edge of the mountain, then disappeared into trees that whispered like elders when the wind moved through them. Some said the path led to a nearby village. Others claimed it went nowhere at all, but everyone knew it was where people went when they were ready to leave, or ready to return. I first walked it in my last month at the monastery, not with the intention of leaving, but because something inside me felt full, not resolved, not complete, just full, like a bowl that could hold no more without spilling. I needed space to listen to what the silence inside me was trying to say. Master Genjo met me at the start of the trail. "You'll find what you've already found," he said. I didn't understand, but I bowed anyway. The path was quiet, moss-covered, stones peeked from beneath fallen leaves, and here and there, wild orchids bloomed beside forgotten roots. The deeper I walked, the more the world seemed to let go of its edges. Time stopped holding shape. Thoughts slowed. The wind no longer asked to be noticed. It simply was. I didn't know how far I went, only that the farther I walked, the less. I felt like I was going anywhere. It wasn't a journey away from the monastery. It wasn't even a journey into something new. It was a return. To what? I couldn't name. Then, at a bend in the trail, there was a clearing, a wide circle of earth surrounded by trees older than memory, and at the center, a stone, flat, moss-covered, carved faintly with words that could barely be read. I knelt before it, brushing away bits of lichen, and slowly the inscription emerged. "You have arrived where you never left." I sat down. There was no sudden realization, no grand insight, just breath. And beneath that, stillness. And beneath that, a knowing that didn't need language. This was the final lesson of the path, that we spend so much of our lives seeking what was never lost, reaching for what is already here, running to arrive at what we have been all along. In Zen, the idea of no path, no goal is not nihilism. It is intimacy, a reminder that awakening is not somewhere ahead of us. It is behind our eyes, within each footstep, folded into the shape of our breath. We return not to escape, not to arrive, but to recognize the sacred in the ordinary, the stillness in the motion, the truth that waits in each pause. Modern psychology has a term, self-congruence, the state of being aligned, your actions, your emotions, your values, all harmonizing. But Zen goes deeper. It says, there is no self to align, only presence to return to. Master Genjo once said, "You think you have wandered, but the heart never moves, only the mind forgets." I don't know how long I sat there in that clearing. I only know that when I stood up, I did not feel changed. I felt remembered. As I retraced my steps, the forest looked the same. The stones still lay where they had always been. The birds still called from the same branches. But I heard them differently. Not as signs, not as symbols, just as birds, just as breath, just as life, meeting itself again. When I reached the monastery gate, I found no one waiting, and that was right, because there had never been a ceremony for returning, only the quiet click of the door as it opened once more. Tonight, if you feel far from yourself, if you feel like you've wandered too long, missed too many turns, forgotten how to begin again, sit with this truth. You are not lost. You are the path. Close your eyes. Place your hand gently over your chest. Feel the rise and fall. That is the sound of your return. Not dramatic, not loud, but real. Like a footstep on earth. Like a breath taken without effort. Like a home that never locked its door. There is no path. There is only walking. Zen reflection. Thank you for walking with us. If even one story reached into the quiet part of you, if even one moment felt like home, then this empty boat has done its work. Before you return to the noise of the world, take a breath. Let it settle. Let it stay. And if these stories offered you something, peace, insight, a pause, we invite you to share that feeling. Leave a comment. Let us know which story stayed with you. Sometimes your reflection becomes someone else's healing. If you'd like. More journeys like this, more silence, more stories, more remembering. You're welcome to subscribe and stay with us. This channel is a river, and we are only just beginning to drift. Until then, be gentle with your thoughts, be kind to your becoming, and remember, you were never meant to carry the world alone.